things are informal conversations. So if you have a question to any of these artists, please stick up your hand. I try to find artists that do very different work, so you get exposed to very different things in the exhibit. And it boils down to that we have one artist that does very political work, one artist that has work with a political background in it, one artist that has work that sometimes refer to what is happening in the world and sometimes not, and a work of a very personal, well, you know what I mean. We have 3 artists here that are in the Around Oregon Annual. That is the exhibit that we're sitting in. From left to right, your left, Wesley Hurd, who made the yellow painting that, I think it's called Yellow. Wish. And then Bruce Burris, who has done this work here in the corner in a somewhat free form, and it is called A Certain Revolution. And then we have Mark Allison, who made a drawing of a portrait back there. And then we have Beth Barnett, who did a lot of work and created an installation in the Corinne Woodman Gallery. And we are together because I think it was appropriate. The work is compatible. Beth has been in this exhibit, although not this time, sorry, Beth. And this way we could have a more encompassing conversation. So.
When I was in college, I was a biology major. And at probably my junior year, I read Van Gogh's letters to his brother Theo, the Auden selected version. And I wanted to change my major, but my parents nixed that. And they were very concerned if I didn't go into med school, what would I do? So I met a medical illustrator in my junior year. He was a friend of one of my high school teachers, and went down and visited him, and he said, "Get your portfolio together." I said, "What's a portfolio?" And so in a year, I was drawing an hour a day. I really was determined to learn how to draw. And at the end of that year, I got the job. So I was a medical illustrator for a few years, and I became a commercial illustrator. I went back to school, learned commercial illustration and print production and things like that. And I became a freelance artist ever since, actually. I just quit recently taking commissions because I'm more concentrated on fine art now. And I've been teaching the whole time since about 1984.
I said, I've always been interested in art, but I never really felt very comfortable with the idea of myself as an artist. I have this weird thing in which, in drawing and even in kindergarten and throughout, when you're asked to start drawing from various, models and so forth, I have this thing in which I cannot remember spatially that when I look at something to when I put it down, render it on paper or whatever, something is lost in between. So I never could and still can't get drawing down. And at the time that was an interest that people had. How's your drawing? Well, it's not good at all. I one day visited the Philadelphia Museum of Art, as I lived nearby. And on that day, the work of Horace Pippin, who was a regional artist, quite well known, At the time, he'd be thought of as a folk or outsider artist, but we wouldn't view his work in that way today. And very emotional, very appealing, very direct, and quite a narrative storyteller. And then also the work of Marcel Duchamp. And both of those artists quite different, but really coming up with interesting narratives. And that day I was somehow just kind of gelled for me.
I was raised in Claremont, California through high school, where the colleges are, and had a great experience growing up because they had a great art program for kids all the way through. And art was always a part of my life in some way. My father was from the Medford area, and so I ended up going to Southern Oregon College, now a university. And the first year I didn't know what I was doing. The second year for sure I started majoring in art and art education. So I studied art and art education. In those days that would have been in the serious fine art department, would have been abstract expressionism. We're talking 1963, 64, 65, right in there. And I was quite taken with it. It was very organic to my early sensibilities and skill sets, and so I've always been more or less at least half abstractionist.
I was in art classes from childhood, and I had a very good art program at my high school back in Indianapolis, where I grew up. And but all this, as I got into high school, in my early education, I had other skills. I was in like an advanced math class where I went to the high school in 8th grade because I was ahead, and so I've kind of always had art skills, and I've had other skills. And when I went to college, I opted to study history and geological sciences, and I let art fall to the side. I was trying to be practical about, not deciding what I wanted to do exactly and studying everything. So I didn't do a whole lot of art in college. I did a little bit. I took some classes, and I did some coursework when I was in high school with an art school that's IUPUI art school. They had programs for high school students in Indianapolis. So I got some foundation there. And then after I moved out here after college, and I did some traveling. And when my husband and I were finished traveling, I had taken all these photos, and I thought, well, I'll just try doing some oil pastels of these photos. And that really brought me into rediscovering and putting an emphasis on creating art, at least part-time.
Well, I think that is roughly, more or less a collage, even though a lot of the surface is drawn on and painted and so forth. But it probably works roughly in that same way that someone would build a collage. I wasn't thinking too much about the composition. As there was space available, I was filling it. And I can tell that I did that during the winter. The garage isn't heated, so I have a space heater under the table. I like to keep everything right in tight over the winter, so it's small. So I'm sure that was part of it too. And but really, it was just a fun thing to do in terms of just trying to create a really volatile sort of surface and to get.
Well, I really just wanted to make a painting that I could warm myself by in the winter. My work has always been about even when I just restarted in the late 80s, has always been about an exploration of human inwardness. I think all art is an expression of what's going on inside the artist at some level. My work is explicitly targeting that topic, that subject. What's the inner life, and what gets you to the inner life?
The pieces can stand on their own, and sometimes they are saying something about society and technology, and other times I just think they look cool. I mean, it's not necessarily saying something, but some of them are responding to my ambivalence about technology, cell phones, data, this whole environment we live in where we sort of are analog people, but we are kind of forced into this misshapen place where we're in a digital world, and culturally it's affecting how people interact. So part of that, the way that society feels with all that information overload, is an onslaught of images, of data, and so I felt like the art lent itself well to being in a surround, an installation where you're also being, you're given all these different images, and you're trying to pick out, like, what is the message here? What is the point? What is the theme? How can I? And so to sort of mimic that feeling that I think most of us are feeling.
Well, I'll just tell you directly about the work itself. I made Emma's head life-size, as close as I could estimate. And if you look, you'll see that the upper right part of her head is kind of so light that it disappears against the background. That was intentional. What I was trying to create in that piece was just a white space, kind of like a thought space, or I think some people have seen the movie Heaven Can Wait. When they depict heaven, they just have just a white sweep going all the way out to the horizon, and maybe even no horizon. So I wanted it to be kind of that empty space, so that it was just like her head would be more like a thought image. And I lowered the horizon because the horizon represents our eye level, and I wanted our viewer's eye level to be lower than her eye level, so we'll be looking up to her, even though I think she's short of stature. And I concentrated a lot on the eyes, and I've made both of her eyes look at the viewer's left eye. The left eye is processed by the right brain, and that's really the window to the soul. They talk about the eyes, but I think it's more the left eye. So she's looking directly at us and looking into our soul and hearts and saying, well, one of her most famous quotes was, "Fight for your lives before somebody else has to."
So I don't think that art has to respond to anything in particular. I think as I think about what's going on today, it's all over the map. For everything from very political, oppressive situations and responding to those things, to pop insanity, it's just all over the map. And I think it's just mostly a response of the individual artist or group of artists who are concerned about a particular set of issues.
Yeah, I guess that's probably what I do personally, but I don't think it's important that artists should do that necessarily. Just happens to be a thing I do.
But to get to some of the things they were saying about choosing your subject matter and responding to current events, there are a lot of things that I have a lot of opinions and reactions to going on in the world and in our country right now, where personally I don't want to put them into my art directly because I feel like it feeds the beast. So I kind of want to go around from the side to deal with some issues without actually depicting some things in my art directly.
But I see art as a voice that human beings use when we can't find ordinary language being adequate to say what we want to say, or to explore what we want to explore.